Hi, welcome to Josh and Austin Figure It Out. I'm Josh, and this is Austin.
Hi,
Hello,
Josh.
Austin.
How are we doing today?
Oh, pretty good. How are you?
I am good. I'm cold. The cold house saga continues.
Yeah.
It's
Any
start.
progress?
Um, yeah, the thermostat is progressing downwards. That's the only progress. Yeah, it's starting to get actually cold here where we live in Iowa, down into the regularly down into like the 30s and 40s
Yep.
Fahrenheit. Which is pretty cold. It definitely gets colder as we get into the dead of winter, but I'm starting to come downstairs and see that the heat is just constantly running. Um, and I need to wear socks and slippers while I'm downstairs. But no, other than that, it's been good. Um, Same old, gearing up for the holidays. Don't have to do much travel this year, thankfully. Um, Ready to eat more than my fill many times
Right.
over the next couple months. Um, but yeah, they're not doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well too. I'm tired today. I had a young boy wake me up at 2 a.m.
Ah,
last night.
yes.
I think he was having a bad dream, and then I couldn't go back to sleep. So I was laying in bed, and you kind of have the thoughts when you're laying in your bed at night, like how long is it going to take me to fall back asleep? Should I just get up? And so like normally 2 a.m. I'd say, and just definitely try to fall back asleep. But something came to mind is like I had on my list to do um, a possible migration that would cause downtime in my side app BarkPass. And like tonight, I'm already awake. I could do this right now, and then I don't have to like stay up late another night and try to do it during the off hours. And so I stayed up and I migrated our BarkPass domains from one Cloudflare account to another Cloudflare account. And I'm happy to say there was only a little downtime. So
Very
overall, very
nice.
good. Yep.
That's
I'm
impressive. Yeah, messing with a DNS with a sleepy and foggy mind, and you got the job done. That's impressive.
Yeah, the only issue, which I was kind of expecting, was with SSL because Cloudflare doesn't issue SSL certificates. It does it for free, obviously, with the little orange button.
Hmm.
They don't do it until you start getting traffic to Cloudflare, and so you have to like have
Ah,
this awkward period where you change the name server to point to Cloudflare, and and then it has to like get the first couple requests and then like issue the the certificates. Otherwise, you're going to have SSL errors. And then,
interesting.
so that happened pretty quickly without a hitch for one of my domains. And then I had another domain I had to move over that has like a wildcard subdomain. And for some reason or another, the SSL setting for Cloudflare has to be on full and not flexible, which it defaults to. And so because it was on full, I was getting, or on flexible, I was getting a error too many redirects for a hot second. And then I
Okay.
fixed it. So
Well, yeah,
luckily,
that's doing
yeah,
DNS on hard mode. Is waking up in the middle of the
hard
night and
mode.
doing it without.
Luckily, no one was using the site as far as I know. So it was truly impactless. So I'm happy about that.
So you were just up in the middle of the night, hunched over a laptop, just like hitting the refresh button on your new domains until
Yeah,
your SSL got
exactly.
got that
Yeah,
went
and
true.
waiting.
Okay.
And then what I also did was I have all these domains I bought through Google Domains, and as we
Mm.
know,
R.I.P.
they RIP moved everything to Squarespace. It's such a weird move. So I wanted to consolidate and move them to Cloudflare, where I'm doing DNS and everything. And annoyingly, you just have to go to Squarespace and click a button called like send. What does it send request to transfer code, and then it doesn't do it right away, and you have to wait like a couple hours.
Wow. Well, you had nothing but time at 2 in the
Yes.
morning to just sit there and
Yeah.
wait. That is a very odd move. The whole Google domains to Squarespace move. Like,
Yeah.
um, I it seems very odd. I've avoided going into Squarespace at all. This
Yeah.
up to this point, which is a win. But I would have also like thought about consolidating over to Cloudflare. But last time I looked at Cloudflare, like there were a handful of like TLDs that they didn't have yet or that they weren't supporting. Um, Maybe that's changed in the
Yeah.
recent, but like I feel like for a while they didn't have .dev or like .io. But maybe that's changed now.
They definitely have .dev now. I know they've added a bunch more, but yeah, I remember that early days of being like, oh, I can't move anything yet because it's all
Yeah,
like on Google and .dev. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well,
um,
not, what better to do at in the twilight hours than play with your domain names and move them around and deal with SSL issues.
I think that's what every boy dreams of, right? Someday
Yeah,
I'm going to be a grown up and I'm going to be
you're like
up in the middle of the night doing
I can't
domains.
sleep. I just I can't sleep. I need to work on my domains right now. Now's the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No kidding.
Well, that's a long day
Um,
for you, Josh. Being up since 2. I hope we can
yeah,
make it to the end here.
yeah. I hope we can too. I was going to share this past weekend. I did a fun thing and I went up to Ames, um, to Iowa State University campus and met up with my old buddy Marcus, who I was a roommate with in college, and we just did like a guys evening of walking around campus and like hitting up the old spots, and it was really fun.
That
Um,
sounds like a great time.
yeah,
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful Iowa State University campus.
yeah.
What were your old spots, Josh? What places did you frequent, if you don't mind me asking?
It's funny because we go through campus and I mean, it's a nice campus. It's all very walkable because it's central compared to like other places where it's across the city. You have to take a bus or
Hmm.
whatever. But we would walk by these buildings and be like, oh, I had a random like religion class here, or I had a computer science class here in this fancy ornate building. And like a journalism was my major. And so
Hmm.
we walked by the journalism building, Hamilton Hall is still the same, but a couple things struck me. It was like how ugly so many of the buildings are at Iowa State University because they went through this like brutalist like design
Yeah,
phase in
yeah.
the 80s, and it's just like you couldn't imagine an uglier building if you tried.
The amount of just
Just
like gray concrete
uh-huh.
exteriors, it's pretty incredible. I remember reading like one time the comedian Bill Burr. Is that
Hmm.
his name? Yeah, that's his name.
Yeah.
Came to Ames and did a show at CY Stevens, I think, the auditorium there,
Yeah.
and said, "Man, you guys must have got a hell of a deal on concrete back in the day because the auditoriums and the basketball
Full
arena there just completely barren gray concrete structures as far as the eye could see. So that's definitely a
That's so
feature.
true.
It's not all like that, but
Oh no, and
um,
it's the
yeah,
weird thing is it's like peppered throughout all these beautiful ornate buildings, and then they
yes,
were like, we could make it match these buildings that have been here since the early 1900s, but
yeah,
no, this is definitely a
yeah.
design trend, as ugly as possible.
What if we made it just like a concrete coffin, just completely flat and
That
um, cold exteriors?
and it's going to destroy the souls of students walking to
Yeah,
campus in -30 temperatures in January and not wanting to do anything. Like I can just imagine.
yeah,
One thing that was really cool though, they have this new building called the Student Innovation Center,
yes,
I
yeah,
think, or something.
yeah. I haven't
And
been
it
there, but
is,
I've heard of it.
oh man, I hadn't been in. I've driven by, but it is so cool. It's like literally like a startup city slash co-working space inside. You walk in and it's this beautiful open air like lobby atrium, and then you walk over and there's like a whole glass blowing demonstration going on for the club. You can see through these big windows as they're doing that. You look down the stairs in the basement, there's like these race cars with the Formula One type of club. Like there's robotics, there's wood shop, and fabrication shop, and painting. And then like I was just looking at the the map, what do you call it, the indoor maps of places, and the floors, the floor plan, and they had on the top floor is like a entrepreneurial, like, you know like a startup business space too. So it's like if I would almost go back to college just to hang out there. you know
Yeah,
it would be
yeah,
so
it's
fun.
really cool. My brother went on a tour of it recently and was telling me about it, and it's like I was like, man, is this place open to the public? Like, I want to go stop by and like set
Yeah.
up shop there because I he was telling me like they have like the culinary students will like sell food there, and
Yeah.
like the different disciplines kind of like all come together and do their thing. Really cool. Yeah. When you were in school, what would you have done at the Innovation Center, Josh? Would you have started up your own newspaper there, or what journalism things
Yeah.
would you have done?
That's the thing, is like I was very keyed in on being a journalist. And I wanted to do like broadcast journalism or like honestly film production. And so I don't know that much would have been like up my alley at the time, but as a grown up now, 15 years later, I certainly would partake in as much as I could. Like, talk about just being surrounded by the wealth of intelligence and motivated students who are in there with you. Like, if you're looking for a new startup partner, like, man, that's the place to go look for it. And
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure that's like where the next Google is going to be created. I feel like, sort of in that
Yeah, I
building.
mean,
So,
people talk about the feeling the energy of a San Francisco or a New
yep.
York City, but those people have never been to the Iowa State Student Innovation Center.
Yeah.
That's the true energy.
The true energy. So that was, and then, so where I frequented most of all was music hall, because I was in marching band all 4 years of college, and then in like concert bands, and then a band, academic fraternity, social fraternity type of thing, service fraternity. That's what it is. And so that's where I spent most of my time. Also, a very ugly building, but I have fond memories there. So,
The
Austin, did you
music hall is that the name of a bar?
music? No, I don't know if it's a bar in Ames. Bro, you're saying I get it. Oh my god. Yeah, music hall isn't at Drake. There's a library bar called the Library, and I
Oh,
love that
sure. Yeah.
because that's what I
Yeah.
think of when you say that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, mom, I was at the library last night till
Yeah.
1 a.m.
It's perfect. Yeah. Well, when I
Yeah.
asked what places you frequented most, I thought you were going to like list off the Welch Avenue, um, the greatest hits, Welch Avenue Station and
Oh
AJ
yeah,
Guy's Roost and all of that.
we definitely stopped by those. Welch Ave station was my go-to bar, and we had a couple of drinks there. It has not changed a bit in the last 15 years.
Very
So it
nice.
even smells the same when you walk in. So you're like, oh, I'm home. I was going to
Well,
ask,
that sounds like a good time.
have you been back to your alma mater and like visited, or have you just stayed home?
No, that's a good question. I have been actively avoiding going back at all costs. Not because of the school, not because of the school. The So I went to the Indian Hills Community College
Yeah.
in sunny Ottumwa, Iowa, southern Iowa, which is a city that is on a river. So it's heyday, it's glory day. It was many years ago, many years ago. So it's far past its prime, and not the kind of city or town I would like to spend my free time in
Yeah.
willingly. um,
Yeah.
Not the nicest spot, but I will say the campus, Indian Hills campus, is by far the nicest place to go in Ottumwa. So definitely wouldn't
Nice.
be opposed to going back, but it's like a 2 hour drive, and they haven't asked me to come back to talk about any of my great successes or try to teach the next generation. So once I get that call, maybe I'll go back, but not really since then.
They'll give you an honorary doctorate and yeah, Indian Hills CC.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, someday.
Yep. Yep.
Cool. Do you have any shout outs this week for people and or listeners?
Disappointingly, no shout outs the past 2 weeks. I guess our 20 regular listeners must be all of your friends and all
Oh,
of
I
your
don't know.
family, plus my dad. That's our entire listenership, I guess.
Yeah. My mom said that she tried to listen to it, but couldn't figure it out. So I gave
Wow.
her some
That's the
tips.
thought that counts.
It is, yeah. So she may be listening to this as we speak. Who knows?
Okay. Shout out Mrs.
Um,
Larson.
yes, and Tony Larson, and also shout out my cousin Susie, Susie in Seattle. So
Oh,
she took a listen to our first episode as well. So
thanks for listening,
cool.
Susie.
Reminder to all our listeners: if you listen to every episode, there will be a prize at the end. So keep listening.
You just have to wait,
Um,
another 300 to 400 more episodes for
right.
delivery, but we'll get there.
Listen, we demand loyalty, and that's all. That's all I'll say. So, gosh, you want to talk about websites?
Let's talk about some web stuff. Josh, you have written down in our notes,
Yes.
the copious amount of notes and pre-show prep that we do, that you
Hours and hours.
you have a number of acronyms written down, namely SSR. You want to talk about
Mm.
SSR, which if you're a web person, will immediately ring a bell. It typically stands for server-side rendering. Why do you want to talk
Hmm.
about that, Josh? What's on your mind?
Oh man, it has been such a hot topic for me recently, especially at work. I've been busy converting a website at work that has lots and lots of pages on it to to be rendered on the server. And so like for the untrained ear, what that means is like websites uh, are render in your web browser, like your Google Chrome or your Safari or Firefox, and they often like have this thing called HTML, which generally shows the stuff on the page. But in recent years, these application frameworks powered by JavaScript, which is another kind of dynamic language, scripting language, popped up, and it provides more interactivity and composability and everything. And so people have written a lot of applications with this JavaScript framework stuff. The downside is that it requires JavaScript to be running in your browser, and that adds constraints as to like how you can consume the website. No longer can you just read the source code, or as like a crawler or bot to visit your website and get a good read on what is on the page, because you have to execute JavaScript to show the stuff on the page. And so the site I'm working on at work happens to be this client side rendered JavaScript type of site with no really meaningful HTML on the page. That is that works fine to humans using the website. Like nobody knows the better. But if you're a crawler or like a machine learning scraper or something, it probably means that the website is not as valuable, nor does it have the information that we're trying to convey. So we want this website to be found, right? In some cases, like you're building stuff on the internet you don't want to be found, or you don't want like LLMs or large language models like your chat GPTs to find your stuff, because you don't want it being stolen from you. But in a lot of cases, you do want people to find your stuff. So long story short, that's what I've been focusing on.
So yeah, so there's a lot there. So this is work related website you're chatting about. What type of website is it?
It's a documentation site, and it's written in React. It's actually a Rails server, but it's written in React on the client side. And so the Rails server returns a server response that contains a bunch of JSON formatted data. And then it hydrates, or I guess it loads up the client side JavaScript, downloads and renders, and it uses the JSON data to show the page.
Yeah, that's so a documentation site is like one of your classic examples of this should be server side rendered, right? Like
Yeah.
uh common like that's one of the most common examples people cite when they say this website should be rendered to HTML by a centralized computer, and that HTML should be sent to the browser, and that should be the end of the story. Um, namely, people talk about when you have a lot of content, a lot of text that you want to be delivered quickly to people. Why should every single person's browser have to do the work of rendering this text?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just rendering it on one big server somewhere and sending it to them directly. And then, of course, the SEO play that you mentioned earlier of why don't we make it easier on Google, when they look for our website, that they can actually read what the website's about rather than having to execute the JavaScript. Are there
Yeah.
other motivations that you folks have to move to SSR, or is that pretty much the sum of it?
That's the main driver, is the scrapability and discoverability by these bots and crawlers. And so we actually took a pass at converting this this client-side rendered JavaScript application, React application to be rendered on the server. And so this is why I brought up this concept of SSR, and folks may not be familiar with it, but the practice of server-side rendering a React app in particular is made possible because there are web servers that run on this platform called Node.js, and Node is the server runtime for JavaScript, while like the client runtime is in your browser, and it renders it there. They're both JavaScript. They're the same JavaScript. The fact that the same script runs in both the browser and the server means it's isomorphic, meaning like it can be run in both places. And so in theory, like you should be able to send the same code through this server renderer in React and render out a shell effectively, or a pre-rendered version of the page in HTML, an output of HTML, send that to the browser and the server response. And then rather than rendering the React tree, it does this step called hydrate, where it crawls through the tree, finds all the nodes and compares them to the JavaScript version of the tree, and then makes them all interactive and hydrates them. So that's how it's supposed to work. Now, when we went and did this in a week or two, we ran into a bunch of problems. First of all, when you write a React application that is only ever going to run in the browser, you write it a certain way. You will refer to things that only exist in browsers, like the window or document object or location object. That crashes the render on the server because that's not available. You also make different choices as to like how you structure your components and how you load data. For example, the idea that there would be this JSON payload sitting on the window object, just sitting in a script tag, permeated throughout the whole code base. So we are always calling out to the window dot, give me my blob of data. That doesn't fly either on the server because there's no window object. And then instead of like just passing it as a prop or using some sort of a server loader, you have to manually change all that stuff. It just doesn't happen. So we hacked our way through this and got this page rendering on the server and shipped it to production. But we just continually found a number of things happened. There were a bunch of visual bugs that we didn't, that because of the changes we had to make it work, caused downstream visual bugs and second order bugs. But also the performance was awful. And that was the biggest eye opener for me, honestly. Right. We had before a site that was loading relatively quickly. There was a really big server response payload, which I'll talk about in a second. But it was fine, honestly, in the client from a human's perspective. Not great from a bot's perspective. When we catered to the bot by server rendering everything first, not only was the server response more slow, like noticeably slower, it also contained like visual bugs, and like navigating between pages in the browser was slow and clunky. And so for all intensive purposes of people, we made it much worse. And so we decided to roll it back, honestly. And I came away from that whole thing kind of humbled, and learned that SSR is not the silver bullet I've always assumed it to be. Like I would always scoff for years when I see, that's a client-only React application. You got to server render that, baby.
Mm-hmm.
and how naive I was to think that. But I mean, obviously there are still benefits to server rendering it, but yeah, I just learned a ton during that whole experience.
Yeah, that sounds like a saga.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, a few interesting things there. Like, I was in the same boat as you, where it's like you see your classic client side React app where it's like, oh, this is so much over engineering and all this wasted work that's happening in the client when you could just send HTML and everyone would be much happier. It'd be way faster and leaner and all these things. Like, those are just kind of some built-in assumptions I have for sure. So I'd be curious to hear, like, well, what do you think it was about this website in particular that made the transition to SSR falter a little bit? Like, do you think it was the fact that you were trying to piece in this migration of an existing large app where it's like you're kind of trying to shoehorn it in a way that maybe wasn't optimal? Like, do you think that was the main reason why it struggled?
Yes, that's a good question. There's two main things, and the first is that exact reason. We were starting with the finished product and working backwards to add SSR retroactively, and that
Yeah.
is where we ran into all these pitfalls. And that was just challenging. And the site itself just has, had many contributors over the years and has not had the opportunity to be have its technical debt whittled down or consistent patterns created and vetted. But the other big reason is that the website is huge. It's literally like 15 layers of nesting on some pages. And so the return types, the list of nested types on one page that I'm thinking of is 800 unique types. So that's just the main body of the page. And that, again, is being encoded as JSON, server rendered from the server in a JSON payload and a script tag. Not only that, but we also have to contend with the left-hand navigation to address. There's 3,500 or 4,000 unique types in the entire GraphQL schema. Those all have to be nav items, and they have to be hydrated somehow, right? So you can list what nav items are existing in your website. And so if you take your run-of-the-mill default SSR strategy that you're used to in a Next.js or a Remix world, you send it from your loader, you're already looking at like 500K of JSON just for the nav, and then 3 megabytes of JSON for the main body. And you haven't rendered any HTML yet.
Yeah.
So this proved to be very challenging. Like, as soon as we added HTML to that, it almost doubled in size. And so we're serving these giant pages. And that got me thinking, and I was talking to my coworkers, very smart coworkers, who were like, all right, we need to find a way to render these pages without requiring a bunch of JSON to serialize it and hydrate it. Because especially when it's all just like effectively like the details summary HTML toggle thing, the like little progressive disclosures, those should just be HTML, and you should be able to just use browser native toggling. And so we started thinking, and we're like, gosh, I wish there was a way to render components on the React server, but not have them render in the client. And here we are today. There's that, I think that exists. It's called server components, but it just is not supported yet in React Router and Remix. And it's still very, very early and new. But
Josh, you are like the earliest user of server components that I've ever talked to. You were on server components years ago. It seems like years ago.
It was years ago. It was the Civil War era. In fact, is when I first picked up server components, and like it was pretty early then. We didn't have electricity.
So you've had so much time to have your opinions bake and solidify and become the correct opinions. So I want to ask you what's going on with server components? Are server components like purpose built to serve or to solve this exact problem that you're running into? Is this the one use case that server components were actually made for?
I'm starting to feel more and more convinced that yes, it might be the case. I think in other cases, I've built things in server components that didn't necessarily have to be, and in fact were maybe less ergonomic and less developer friendly because they were server components, when they would have been just fine in your classic loader SSR to client paradigm. But this seems like a good case. The reason that we kind of like found ourselves here is like the workarounds, for example, in a Remix or React Router app, there are workarounds, right? If I want to render a left-hand nav with 3,000 nav items, but I don't want, okay, let's step through this. There's 3,000 nav items I have to render, right? I need to know what to render on a page that might have different nav items on a different page. So naturally, I'm going to want to collect some data in a loader and then tell my React components about the data that I have. So I send it from the loader as my loader data response. That loader data contains the JSON, so 500 kilobytes worth of JSON, talking about the links. Renders on the server, everything's great. It's just HTML at that point. However, by default, when your server response goes out, your remixes and React routers will send a script tag at the bottom with a little sneaky context hidden underscore blob of information that tells the client bundle about what it's seeing, what the route is, what the route data is, so that it can go through and hydrate everything, because it needs that same exact data to be able to render that stuff. And that's where we have the issue of like, oh man, I really only needed it on the server. The client stuff is probably fine. Like it's just closing and toggling things. So what you can do in Remix is you can use object.define property, give it a name, and then pass an object with value of what the value is, and then enumerable false. And so by defining this non-enumerable property, Remix will not serialize that into the script tag. It'll just be null or undefined. And then you have to do some more hacks in your component. So you actually render out the stuff on the server, but then you check like if type of document is not equal undefined, then you just effectively return a no op component, which opts out of hydration by passing dangerously set inner HTML to an object. So, and then you have to say ignore suppress hydration warning. And then you also have to memoize like for future renders. So if you do a hot module reload or you have to re-render the whole tree, you need to memoize like what are the child nodes in the HTML here, and just stick those in for the next render rather than an empty object. And then you have to add like any sort of click handlers for routing. You'll want to add like just a standard use effect or an on-click handler to do any sort of routing by hand. So it is possible, Austin. It is not sexy.
Yeah, that might be one of the ugliest things I've ever heard. I didn't even really consider that as an option to like try and opt out a single like component or tree from hydration just to try and save on payload size.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Josh. So the conversation of like let's just not have JavaScript at all on the front end, that probably is going nowhere, right? If you have lots of other interactivity going on.
Yeah, it's certainly we need some JavaScript, but what comes to mind though is you see like Astro, right? With Astro like client islands and the whole concept of island architecture, which comes to mind. You're like, maybe that is the right answer for some project like this. Maybe it's not, fighting React the way it's been written, or maybe it's not server components, this brand new paradigm, which requires a bunch of other things to work. Maybe it is just a different approach.
Yeah, that's what my mind went to as well. Because you're talking about like when you're doing the whole server under React, hydrate the thing on the front end. You're either all in or you're all out, right? With the
Right.
hydration when you get to the front end, it's even if it's just this little piece here, this button, these tabs, this nav that I need JavaScript for. If you choose to hydrate React on the client, you're doing the whole shebang. You're doing the whole thing, and all of the performance costs that comes with that. And the question arises, right, is like, is it worth paying the price of the entirety of React's hydration um, for these few pieces of UI that we need to be interactive? Which again, this comes back to like, yeah, if you could just greenfield this from the start and just blow away everything and say, no, actually, this is the wrong paradigm.
Yeah.
Well, then yeah, maybe you could take a few months and rewrite it in Astro, and maybe that's what you'll end up doing. I don't know. But when you have something existing that's real and that's already serving lots and lots of users, I assume you don't get that luxury.
Yeah, it's really hard to justify. Not only are you moving away from the front end layer, but like you're moving toward this brand new ecosystem of Astro, which has its own patterns. And for example, like Starlight is this Astro documentation library, and it's super nice. And they have all like the components for code snippets and stuff built in. It's what Cloudflare uses. And that was going to be my cool thing today. I can talk more about it, but something like that, even like the way that a lot of the documentation happens to be written is not going to adhere to that at all. So it's written in such a foreign way to how that would even work. So you're then going to have to go rewrite every bit of documentation, which is also not feasible. So in situations like these, you kind of have to pick and choose like what your solution is going to be, and then eventually get to the state that you're really happy with. So
yeah, it's the unfortunate reality of working on stuff that's real that has users. And that's not, your fun little side project on the weekend where you can pick all the exact right technologies and to make all the exact right trade-offs and use all the fun latest stuff. I've heard people say like a lot of people talk negatively about legacy code. Legacy code has a negative connotation, right? That's old, crusty. It has a lot of tech debt built up. But I think Ryan Florence is maybe the first person I heard say like, well, legacy code that's the money making code, the code that actually has customers and makes money and, does something for the business, the code that's actually been there for longer than 6 months, that's serving a real purpose. That's where the tough, like actual engineering trade-offs have to come in, where it's not, npm install latest and greatest to solve my problem. It's like, well, this is not going to be ideal, but we have to work around the constraints of actually having users and having a history of real usage. And that's why Josh, they pay you the big bucks to come up with solutions here.
Right, just to to become humbled and learn what doesn't work through a number of mishaps.
So
Highly recommend it.
You had a successful project, right?
Yes.
If you learned something, and you didn't get fired, then you're
you're
good. You're good to go. It does remind me of like the tendency, I feel like, of like a mid-level, more juniorish level engineer of like walking into an ugly problem like that and being like, we should rewrite this. We should start over from scratch. I've definitely been the one saying that in the meeting of like, this is so ugly and it's too much complexity, and this just needs to be torn down and restarted. And sometimes that is the right answer, and sometimes you get there and it's worth the trade-off. But that is like your first blush reaction of like, this just is crap and we need to start over from the beginning. Typically a hard sell to the business side, right?
It is,
the stakeholders. And usually there's a better trade-off to be found in the middle. So I hope you can get there. If it is a rewrite, that's a lot of fun. I hope you have some fun with that. But lessons learned, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. That's my takeaway, and that's a deep dive into SSR, the pros, the cons, the pitfalls, the trade-offs, and alternatives. Well, we'll have to do a whole episode. Did we do an episode on Astro yet? I don't think we have.
No, we haven't.
We'll do a whole episode on Astro, a whole episode on server components and the history and the current state. But we'll save that for another day.
Yep. You've had enough. You've gone through enough, Josh.
I have
today.
I've seen some things. Cool. Well, do you have a cool thing to share today, Austin?
Yeah, it's a little boring because it's similar to last episode. It's another TV show. It's another Apple TV.
Nice.
It is Silo.
Yes,
it is. I'm becoming predictable, Josh.
Well, that just came out, and I was like, I wonder if Austin's going to talk about Silo. Tell me, have you watched it yet?
Yeah. So Silo, Apple TV Plus, season 1 came out, I don't know, last year, a couple years ago, and season 2 is just starting to be released as of recording. I think episode 2 just came out of season 2. But yeah, another fun like I don't know about fun, but it's another like really interesting story. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic, civilization is living underground in a silo, and people don't know why, and you're trying to figure out why they're down there and what's on the outside, and if the people in charge are telling the truth or not. So a cool another post-apocalyptic thriller mystery. I'm all about that kind of thing. I really enjoyed season one. Season two is just starting to come out, so it's the perfect time to jump on board. And I don't know what it is about Apple TV Plus, but there's a lot of really great stuff in there that just no one has ever heard of because they never advertise their TV shows or try to promote them in any way. But there's a lot of quality stuff on there if you go take a look. So Silo season two.
That's great. I'm excited to watch it. I've watched season one very quickly and was like,
Hmm.
gosh, I really want to know what happens. And I guess it's a
Yeah,
book series, and so like I
it
could go
is.
out
Yeah,
and get the books and read it, but then that would spoil the show. So
it's a big
I
commitment.
waited. I waited like not like I never read books. It's not like I would have ever, in theory, been able to go out and read it. But yeah, I'm excited to see it. It's a good
Yeah,
suggestion. Um, my cool thing, like I mentioned earlier, is the Cloudflare documentation site. Way less cool than Silo.
pretty cool.
The thing that I like about it is that I just did a deep dive this week into it. It's open source. It's fully open source, and so you can go to GitHub and find Cloudflare's docs. It's built with Astro Starlight, and so you get to see how they did certain things and made certain choices with how they structured their docs and write their docs. But then they also have a really good style guide section and like contributors guide in the actual rendered docs. And so you're able to go through and view all the components that you can render. One of my favorite components is the code block, like GitHub code block component. So you literally just use a React looking type of component called GitHub code, point a repo at it, and like you can even pass a range of lines or a like comment marker or a commit hash to render. And so behind the scenes, it knows how to load and fetch that code and show it. So you're able to have like your demo code next to the source of truth, literally be the source of truth in your code base, um, without requiring you to write all the docs there also.
Cool. Yeah, that's
So
really cool.
really neat stuff. So if you like to nerd out about that, I'd go check it out. Because I certainly have. Yeah.
Very cool. If you're curious, Josh, their HTML payload, it looks like it's about 30 kilobytes. So you have something to
Is
shoot
it
for.
really? You're kidding me. It's only 30K.
That's just the HTML doc.
Right. Developers.cloudflare. What's the total JavaScript payload?
Do you know? Oh, I didn't even look. Who cares about JavaScript? You can ship as much as you want. Everyone has an M1 Mac
Um,
now, so
it is 1.8 megs.
over a meg. That's fine.
But
Get the
does that
job done.
include, wait, hide extension URLs? It's only 1.1 meg without extension URLs. I bet much of that is probably the code snippet highlighter stuff, if I had to guess.
Do you know, Josh? Is their entire doc site now Astro and Starlight, or is it just the developer products docs? I guess.
Um,
Question makes sense. Like their
just
docs for like 1.1.1 or whatever. Like, is it all part of the same deal?
It is. So like all their, and this is like a thing I'm learning is important to talk about when docs, you look at DocSite. There are referenced API reference docs are one thing. So then it's like
Yep.
the REST API with open API spec. That is a different site. And so it's like very clearly, very structured with get, post, put, whatever on the left
Yeah.
side. But it appears like every other part of their docs, which are pros and or tutorials, are written
Hmm.
in this Starlight thing. Um,
Cool.
Another good example of that is the Stripe docs. Like the Stripe docs are very specific type of information architecture, but then you go docs/API, and then that's their API reference docs, which,
Yes.
by the way, are server rendered, but they are only partially server rendered. They chunk it
Oh,
into sections, and so they choose top end sections on the page, and then as you scroll, they lazily load the rest in.
intriguing.
So yeah, and that's like
You've been
we're gonna have to come up with something like that too. But
Sounds like you've been spending a lot of time in other people's docs lately, Josh, trying to get ideas.
Where do you get that idea? I'm nuts for docs.
Well, great artists steal. You know what they say.
And that's the whole quote. Yep.
There it is.
Cool. All right. Well, this has been fun, Austin. I might go take a nap later after I'm done working. But it's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, right back at you, Josh. Get some rest. You deserve it. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Talk soon.
Oh yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Yeah, that's what's happening next. Cool.
All right. Only think about a nap.
Yeah, right now. All right. Bye. All right.